Spirit of God, open us to your word given for us, that in hearing you the veil will be lifted and we will be free. Amen. So as you all know, as I say each week at the 10 o'clock service after the gospel is read, the word gospel means good news. It comes from a Greek word, it means good news. But when you hear the first reading, especially today's gospel, it's hard to kind of figure out how this is good news. I mean, really, anguish such as never been seen, shame and contempt, nation rising against nation, earthquakes and famine. Jesus was clearly not having one of his better days when he spoke these words in the gospel, which may very well have been. He might have been having a really bad day because when this gospel was spoken, it was only a week until he would be crucified. And Jesus knew that this was coming. He had read the signs and knew what was going to happen. So he probably was thinking end times, his own end times. And actually these readings and next week's readings are very focused on the end times and the second coming of Jesus. Both week's readings are very, very dramatic. Visions of Jesus in heaven, clouds and spirits, fiery thrones and books of judgment. Figures in white robes and hair like wool. On the surface, these readings do not really sound like good news. Yet I think if you look just below the surface, below the initial impression, you will see exactly that, good news. You look at the gospel today, for instance. This is one of those passages from the Bible that people often quote as evidence of the end of days, the coming of the end of the world. Some people have a strange fascination with the end times, and they preach and believe around all of this, looking for signs and warnings and predictions. People will see wars and earthquakes overseas and here at home and natural disasters as evidence, clear evidence that Christ is coming back any moment now. Now, don't get me wrong, there is plenty of ugly stuff happening in our world. The ugliness of humanity is on full display every night at 6:30 on channels 2, 4, and 7, and a whole bunch of other channels as well. Pipe bombs being sent to people who have a different political opinion. People being pushed onto subway tracks, nations against nations, even serious divisions within our own country. And of course, most recently, we've seen nature, forest fires that are killing and displacing hundreds in California. Over 1,000 people now missing. Throughout our world, earthquakes and volcanoes and droughts, just like the Bible says. And the list goes on and on. And people, we want to make sense of this. What does this all mean? But as you know, these things have been going on since the dawn of humanity. Earthquakes and famines and droughts, it's all been happening. So the story people create is that the world is about to end. People have been talking about this for centuries. Jesus will come back triumphantly on the clouds. In some way, for some folks, it makes people feel better about what's happening. It's not really what Jesus taught. It was not the heart of his teaching. Not that he won't return, but he was clear. Jesus was very clear that we can never know where or when or how. What Jesus does teach is that these things are things we should not be worrying about, not be focusing on. It's not what disciples are to be concerned about. Disciples are to be concerned with following and learning and listening to God. What Jesus is saying in this reading is don't worry about these things. Be aware, but don't worry. Look very carefully at the gospel passage today. In this entire reading, there are actually only two things that Jesus tells us to do. Only two. Be aware that you are not led astray. And don't be alarmed. That's really what Jesus tells us to do. Be aware. And don't be alarmed. That's it. So the message from this gospel is that despite what is going on around you, for all of the storms, the difficulty, or the struggle, look at me. Don't lose sight of Christ. Know that I'm here and don't be afraid. See, there's a lot of voices, a lot of distractions to take our attention away from what it should be on. our relationship with Christ, our prayer life, our life with our family. And sometimes we can be so consumed with the end point that we miss a lot. Sometimes we can be so consumed with our own end point, where this journey of ours, our personal journey, is going. Where am I going? What is my goal? How will this situation end? We can strain so hard to see where we're going, what's up ahead, that we can stop looking at what's right in front of us. And miss God because we're looking out there to figure out what our end point is. All of our sisters and brothers in California these days who have lost their possessions, lost everything, not to mention those who have lost members of their own family, must be focused on their end point. How is this all going to end? What's it going to be like 6 months or a year from now? When will healing come? When will things be made right again? It must seem so far away for them. So the lesson is, whatever we are going through, in the middle of whatever you are going through, whatever is bringing you stress and anxiety, whatever is terrifying you, whatever is threatening you, whatever is turning your life upside down, I have news for you. God's not coming. God's not on the way. God isn't planning on showing up and helping you. Because God is already right there. God is already in the middle. God doesn't need to show up. Because God was there with you before this ever began. But because we get so focused on the problem, we get so focused on how this particular journey is going to end, and we look so far into the future that we forget to look at what is right in front of us. A God who is saying, tapping us on the shoulder, I'm right here. You don't have to worry. I'll walk with you to the end point. Focus on me today, and we'll do this together. Really good at missing the things that God puts into our life. Very often when I counsel couples before marriage, I'll talk about how we see each other as spouses after we're married, where we put our focus. See, sometimes in this journey of marriage, we lose our focus. We lose the ability to see what is in front of us. We look at some end point in our life that is not our husband or our wife or our family, and in trying to find happiness and trying to find fulfillment, we look for the answers out there. And so years and years go by, and we often fall into the trap of missing who it is who is next to us, because our eyes are focused out there. The message of the gospel today is stay focused on what is real and now and important. Don't get caught up in things that are beyond your control, because you don't have to control them. You cannot control them. But there is one who is in control. And if you focus on that spirit, what you need, you will find. We will all at some point get bad news from doctors that puts the brakes on our regular life. And suddenly how everything looks and feels is filtered through the lens of an illness. And thoughts and schedules swirl around doctor's appointments and lab results. We've gotten used to hearing about another mass shooting with no apparent motive. We'll struggle with money that sometimes seems to disappear as soon as we get it. And with the question of how are we going to make it financially if things don't change. Those things can pull us off course. As disciples of Jesus Christ, we are called not to lose our way. Do not be led astray, Jesus tells us. Let's not get lost in all of this. Don't lose your way in the dangerous, disillusioned world that we live in. Because God is already here. God is in all of this. Christ is in this with you. feeling the pain and the struggle and the fear and the anxiety that you feel at every moment. When you're lying awake at 2 o'clock in the morning trying to figure this out in your head, Christ is there with you, feeling all the same feelings. And he knows what it's like, because he felt them long before you ever did. So be aware that you are not led astray. And don't be alarmed. This is what we're taught in the gospel today. Don't lose your way. Don't be afraid. Don't lose yourself in the struggle and in the fear. I am right next to you. Amen. Let me so.